Okay. So what made you decide to get into this profession?
Well, if profession it be, journalism is something I've been doing most of my life in television. I think in terms of getting involved in the nuclear issue, it started back at CNN when I did a special report, or started to do a series of reports called Stopping the Unthinkable, Strategies to Halt the Bomb. And I did some reporting on it that caused some people in the Pentagon to be uneasy, and they complained. I had said, for example, that 52% of federal taxes in America go to the military, which in fact they do. But that was challenged, and there were some other complaints, and the result was I was aware, A, that it's a very important story, and B, that there are a lot of people who don't want this known or discussed, particularly the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon. And it may be so, I think, to some extent in Russia too, and I think that Alexandra Khaimenova, who's now working for us as representative when she's in Russia, might have more to say about that. But certainly, I was aware that it is a big problem, and it's a problem that not enough people know enough about. And so I've been working on that ever since I became involved with the War&Peace, an NGO, a non-governmental organization, one of those organizations that represents not governments but the people. And as an NGO, it was involved primarily in disarmament, and specifically even more in nuclear disarmament. So I've been involved in that one way or another ever since, including the trip to Russia to work on the documentary about Petrov, the Russian commander who, on a fateful night in the bunker in 1983, did not call for the pressing of the button, and thus avoided nuclear war. But Alexandra will be able to tell you more about that. She was directly involved in that, and that's why we're very glad to have her, as a young person too, involved with us as an NGO. And perhaps it should be pointed out that it is the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations like War&Peace, that really do represent the people here at the United Nations. The opening words of the United Nations Charter are, "We the people," not we the governments. Anyway, Melissa, you've been able to see some of the NGOs at work here as our student representative. You've come here to some of the NGO meetings with the people from around the world, meeting with UN experts on so many of the issues that the UN is involved with. You saw a conference on slavery, conference on conflict resolution, and as you've seen, the NGOs often attract a lot of celebrities. You've seen Forrest Whitaker here talking about a film he's made on child soldiers at a UNESCO conference. And by the way, it is UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization that War&Peace often works with. It's UNESCO that is the most visible face of the UN. You've seen that with everything from the environmental exhibitions here on the polar regions, to the musical concerts with performances from around the world. And of course, on the outside of the UN too, you see that there are almost always protesters protesting about something the UN is doing or not doing. And in many ways, the United Nations is a unique place for solving social problems. It's the only place in the world where there are no foreigners. But when it comes to nuclear disarmament, even though the United Nations has over all the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty conferences which the NGOs attend, and often including celebrities like Michael Douglas and Christy Brinkley, and in overwhelming majorities have called for an abolition of nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, nations like India and Pakistan and Israel and North Korea and possibly Iran either have acquired nuclear weapons or are working to get them. And the problem is that so long as America and Russia continue to maintain tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, thousands of them on hair-trigger alert, then there's no way that other nations are going to be persuaded to either not acquire them or to get rid of them. It's like a cigarette smoker telling people not to smoke. So anyway, that's why War&Peace has a project now called The Last Bomb, in which we're exploring ways in which we can possibly harness the power of the digital social networking to involve people around the world in nuclear disarmament.
So what role do you feel that the UN is playing in nuclear disarmament?
The UN is doing what it can, and that's limited, because the UN is an organization that's 190 different countries, and pretty much the two big powers, Russia and America, which have veto power in the in the Security Council. That is to say, they have the power to block any resolution going through. That's true of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council: France, Russia, China, the United States, and Britain. The big nuclear power nations. And they can overrule or block or veto anything at all that the General Assembly or the United Nations agencies may put forward if they don't like it. Any one of them can stop that. So it's very limiting. So as you say, what is the United Nations doing? I suppose everything it can do, and it can't do all that much, as is evidenced in the case of nuclear weapons, because the very first resolution that the United Nations brought up when it was first created more than 60 years ago was to call for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And here we are today, still making the same plea.